Hey guys, it's Savannah with Ecofine Properties, and today I'm here to talk about whether or not elections actually have historically impacted the housing market. So as you guys know, the 2024 presidential election is just months away, and oftentimes when approaching an election year, we do tend to see a change in buyer behavior. The concern becomes, oh, well, I want to see what happens before I make a decision. And that mindset can make people believe that there might be a drop in the residential housing market, prices might come down, demand might change, etc. So I wanted to kind of talk about historically what we've seen in the past for elections and what, if any, housing market changes we see and when you can kind of expect to see those slight changes. So to start off, I want to talk about home sales specifically. And historically, presidential elections have only had a small and temporary impact on the housing market. During election years, there's typically a slight slowdown in home sales, especially in that November time frame. But this slowdown is mostly due to the uncertainty and hesitation about making big decisions during such a pivotal time, right? However, it's important to really ultimately note that this slowdown is temporary, and usually historically you can see home sales start to bounce back as early as December and continue to rise the following year. In fact, data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development and National Association of Realtors actually shows that after 9 of the last 11 elections, home sales actually continued to increase the following year. You can see here that each year with a presidential election is noted in blue, and the year immediately after the election is in green. If existing home sales rose that year, you'll see them in green. The two orange bars represent the only years when home sales actually decreased during an election. So now that we've talked about home sales, I want to talk about what happens to home prices during election years. Do they go down? Do they go up? And typically data would show that home prices don't usually go down during an election year unless that trend was already occurring prior to the election, right? So in other words, home prices is more dictated by the actual housing market itself during the election versus the election itself. Home prices are pretty resilient during this time of year. When we're into looking at elections and things like that, they generally rise year over year, regardless of the elections. The latest data from NAR shows that the 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, home prices increased the following year. And as you saw in the previous graph here, the years that you saw the orange where prices actually decline was during market crashes or things that were outside of the historical norm, right? We know that in general, home prices tend to appreciate. That's why it makes such a great investment to hold on to year over year for long periods of time. That's when you tend to see the greatest return. So, this graph just reiterates that, elections really have but a small temporary effect on maybe home sales, but overall really doesn't affect home prices unless there are issues going on with the market already. So if you're worried about losing equity or that prices are going to drop during the election year, I think you can rest assured that, history shows that most of the time prices usually rise after a presidential election. Now, the last item that I want to look at is mortgage rates, right? And out of the past 11 presidential election years, data from Freddie Mac shows that mortgage rates decreased from July to November in 8 of them. This is really important to take a look, guys. Fed is already kind of discussing approval of lowering those mortgage rates. There's rumors always that this can be done to help tilt the scale to favor one of the presidents over the other and help things move along. Obviously, a thriving economy helps benefit the overall attitude towards an electional year, right? So there's a lot of ideas that this is part of the motivation to seeing rates drop prior to elections. And, whether there's any truth to that, what have you, history does show that out of the last election, 11 election years, rates do tend to drop from that July to November in 8 of those election years. Most of the forecasts expect mortgage rates to ease slightly through the remainder of the year. If they are right, this year will follow the trend of declining rates leading up to most of the, previous elections. And if you were looking to buy a home in the coming months, this could be good news, as low rates could, also mean obviously a lower monthly payment. And, a lot of people have been waiting for a while for rates to come down. Do I think it's going to be a massive adjustment? No, I think, most lenders are quoting that we might see somewhere back in the sixes. It still makes a difference. It can still impact your monthly payment, certainly. So this is great news for the economy, but all to be said that we don't tend to actually see a negative trend around the housing market when it comes to elections. So what does this mean for you? Whether you're looking to stay put, sell, or buy, the reality is that election years historically have not had a long-term impact on the housing market. If it does, it's very temporary. And if you look at the housing market year over year, you almost never see a major difference from an election year to a non-election year. You've seen the graphs. There's a few select instances where it's outside of the norm due to a housing crash or some other stipulations that were going on in the market prior to. But overall, I wouldn't fret about the election. Again, historically, it's had very little impact to the housing market. And if it does, it's usually temporary.